I'm Christina. I have always been fascinated with how our environments can change the way we feel. Growing up, I used to love building forts and rearranging furniture. It would have an instant effect on my perspective and my mood. So I came to understand that there's this reciprocal nature to creating spaces, that we shape our environments and in turn, they shape us. So when it came time for college, I actually studied interior design. But pretty much right out of school, I realized shopping for a throw pillow was definitely not for me, and so I transitioned into architecture. I've always had this innate love of nature, and so natural building methods have always been my preference. I couldn't stay away from hands-on workshops like Earthships and the Natural Living School. I soon applied my architectural design skills to a multifamily project in Kauai where we use carbon-smart materials like magnesium board and Vastu techniques. So Vastu is the Indian practice of designing structures to achieve energetic harmony. I've always really been interested in these energetic design philosophies like Vastu and even Feng Shui. But for a time, I didn't really see them as that practical. But the more I started to learn, I came to understand their true value. And I was eager to use them in my work. It would just be some time before I developed a reliable approach to do this. In the meantime, I spent most of my 20s managing a 10-acre property in Maui. It was there that I learned all the ins and outs of maintaining off-grid systems. I did a lot of hands-on building and renovating, and I even built my first house. At the time, I also lived next to a bamboo farm, and I would help them harvest the poles and build structures with the bamboo. I love bamboo so much, I went to Bali to study the traditional joinery of that craft and eventually worked for an architectural firm that specializes in prefabricated bamboo structures. Later, I moved to Colorado, a completely different climate, and so I started working with compressed earth blocks. So compressed earth blocks use locally derived earth under compression to make bricks. And so we use these bricks to design fire-resilient homes in that region. Today I work on projects all over the world. I especially love larger rural projects that incorporate some kind of master planning where I can combine natural building, agriculture, and community components in a holistic way. I'm currently collaborating on a project in Kenya where we're designing a multi-structure complex using local materials and regenerative land management practices. I've also dialed in my approach to energetic design principles, and I call it elemental design. So elemental design is this fusion between natural building, the traditional elements, and most importantly, understanding your climate. Climate-specific design is so important. It's frustrating for me to see buildings that don't use materials appropriate for their region. Elemental design aims to help people understand their climate, which results in more comfortable and durable buildings. The natural building space doesn't have a lot of standardization, and so I wanted a framework that simplifies how we work with raw and natural materials. I wanted an accessible tool, similar to the way an artist would use a color wheel to draw parallels between color schemes. So in thoughtful design in connection with nature, our buildings have the capacity to be a force of healing, both for us and for the planet. So my mission is to design places in alignment with the laws of nature, turning a building from a structure into a sanctuary. Sanctuaries are known for being places of refuge and healing. Its definition ranges from a wildlife sanctuary to even holy places such as a temple or a church. As our population grows, development is on the rise, but most new developments exist out of context to their surroundings, disregarding the local and regional climate they're built in. These developments are designed to conquer nature, then provide protection against it, and not exist in harmony with it. They're also not designed for beauty or comfort. So, have you ever felt uncomfortable in a building due to extreme temperatures, poor ventilation, or lack of natural light? You're not alone. In fact, over half the population, 53%, are dissatisfied with their homes. So, the natural building movement has the potential to play a key role in mitigating this and enhancing our overall well being. We're building faster and faster, but we're forgetting to dream. And in the process, we're creating a poorer quality of life for ourselves and destroying our planet. There are three basic principles of elemental design in the context of building. They are merging ancient practices with modern technology, energetic considerations, and most importantly, understanding climate resilience. And climate resilience is really what we're going to focus on the most today. The first pillar is ancient technology. We come from a long history of skilled designers and craftsmen, and so we really don't need to reinvent the wheel. Our ancestors were incredibly wise. They knew all about living in harmony with nature and each other. So, in that light, eco alternative design isn't modern at all. It's actually traditional and vernacular. So, what this typically means is the use of raw and natural materials, passive systems, and a reverence for the place and process. The natural building world and the high performance world have kind of been divided for a long time, but recently it seems like they're starting to merge together. And this is quite cool to see. On the natural building side, you'll see here there's a focus on health, materiality, historic wisdom, passive systems, locally derived materials, non toxic materials. So, all this is to say it's a focus on the embodied carbon side of things, the materiality side of things. And then on the other side is the high performance. So, we see things like passive house movement, the net zero movement. And here we're concerned about emissions versus the embodied side of building. So people on the natural building side are starting to embrace more high performance methods, and people on the high performance side are coming to see the benefits of materiality and embodied carbon choices. So what this typically looks like is overall is carbon drawdown, climate specific detailing, and life cycle analyses. Another pillar of elemental design is how energetic considerations impact our structures. Have you ever known something was off in a building but couldn't quite put your finger on it? When you look at its exterior or inhabit the space, it just feels wrong. This issue is often energetic. Vastu and Feng Shui are both approaches to creating energetically harmonious spaces. Vastu Shastra is the Indian practice of spatial orientation, and Feng Shui is the Chinese approach. So these might sound mystical, but they actually align with practical building principles, such as ensuring adequate sunlight, ventilation, and thermal comfort. Climate resiliency is the final pillar of elemental design, and this is what we'll really focus on today. This is a big one in the natural building movement, especially because a lot of people like a material or know how to work with a material, but it doesn't match the climate they want to build in. So we really want to understand the ecoregions. It's not just the big seven climates. There's a multitude of microclimates within a region. We're also going to look at site-specific design, really understanding the topography, the trees, the neighbors, all the landscape features. And thirdly, we want to prioritize land management. A lot of our designs are just about the house, but we have to prioritize the land first. How will we support a thriving ecosystem on the land? Our buildings should be designed based on how well nature will thrive around them. So here are some simple ways we can incorporate climate resiliency into our buildings. Notice how different each structure looks as it interacts with the local climate conditions. These are examples of just four major climates, but there are a variety of other strategies used in each unique site and ecoregion. So, with the three principles in place, how are some of the basic elements considered in this system? There are five elements in nature: fire, wood, metal, water, and earth. These are universal elements across a variety of sciences and traditions. The symbols actually used here are come from the ancient Greeks, but we also see these elements in other systems like traditional Chinese medicine and Vastu Shastra. So when we talk about an element, say water, We're not just referring to an ocean, river, or even the rain. Water also appears in our buildings as coldness, humidity, condensation, and even dew points. So, in the context of building, we also see that wood is correlated with framing, fiber insulation, and air. Fire relates to the sun, heat, combustion, and fusion. Earth is seen in stone, clay, minerals, foundations, and lime plasters. And metal we see as electricity, technology, and human innovation. When we look at the ancient Taoist philosophy, we find the concept of Wu Xing, and it dates back to 700 BC. Wu Xing is all about creating balance where each element is controlled and supported by the others. The elements relate to one another in different patterns called cycles. Once we understand the cycles, we can use them to relate our buildings to our climate in meaningful ways. So, this is important because when we design a structure, we want to balance the elements we're using. For example, if we're building in a hot and dry climate, we can look to water and earth to balance out the harsh aridity of the surrounding landscape. When an element is deficient, we can look to the regenerating cycle. In Wuxing, the generating cycle, sometimes called the nourishing sequence, shows how each element supports the next in the cycle of creation and growth. The regenerating cycle is nurturing and supportive. In essence, it creates life. And so, in this way, it's often considered the mother cycle. An example of this in the context of building would be adding a metal roof for rainwater catchment and gutters with the metal element to channel and store water for domestic or agricultural use. So, if an element is in excess, we can look to the controlling cycle or the destructive cycle. In the controlling cycle, the elements keep one another from dominating. This ensures that no single element becomes overbearing. You can think of the controlling cycle as a regulating, calming, restraining, and even limiting force. It's also known as the grandparent relationship because when a grandchild becomes overenergized, the grandparent can come in as a dominating yet wise counterpart. So, one example of this would be using wood to provide additional tensile strength to a strictly earthen wall, like using straw in a cob wall, for example. The destructive sequence illustrates how the elements can destroy each other. The destructive cycle is a depleting and deathly force. However, it is not considered a negative thing in Wuxing. Death and dying is a part of the natural cycle, and so we can use it to help balance out these excess elements. One example of this in the context of building would be using earthen materials in a forest fire prone area where the fire is in excess, since in the destructive cycle, earth smothers fire. The five elements also correlate with specific climate conditions. For example, water is associated with coldness in the winter season. In architectural design, this can manifest in considerations for insulation and thermal control layers to manage cold temperatures and prevent condensation. Let's consider how the element water can affect our buildings and designs. Water is the first element in Yuxing phase, and it's essential to life. But when it comes to our building envelopes, it can get a little tricky. Water must be very carefully controlled. Waterproofing is often the first thing we consider when designing or selecting materials for a building. It can come from exterior weather conditions and interior sources like cooking and showering. To manage water effectively, we focus on two crucial building control layers: waterproofing and vapor permeability. Excess water is present in climates with high humidity, consistent rainfall, and even many days of cloud coverage. If we have too much water, we can control it with earth. Earth includes inert, non biodegradable materials like stone, clay, and minerals, and it can overcome water's challenges. The banks of a river contain and channel the flow of water. So, in natural building, our water control layers are often some kind of plaster, which is an earth element. The ancestral Pueblo people of Mesa Verde built dwellings into the sides of cliffs. So, although this was a very dry climate, the places they chose to build were actually quite wet, This was because the shale and the sandstone rock formations have different densities, and this allowed for moisture to seep through and collect in springs where they lived. So, despite the excess water in places they chose to build, these buildings were made of stone masonry, and so the water didn't affect them. These people utilized the natural properties of stone to redirect water seepage, ensuring their structures remained dry and stable while still able to access the water they needed. Over the centuries, stone and plaster buildings have always been able to keep our buildings dry. Earth also does a good job of absorbing water into the soil. So, one particular type of earth that excels at this is clay. Clay is hygroscopic, it can absorb moisture from the air, and so we can use it as a humidity controller in our interior wall finishes. Although it does have some limits to how much it can absorb, just understanding this principle is important when including it in our wall systems. As you'll see in the chart here, clay and wood are the most hygroscopic of them all. And the only difference between clay and wood is that clay does not rot or mold when exposed to moisture. And in fact, it absorbs toxins from the air instead. Lime plasters can be water resistant barriers, but they need to be done correctly and well maintained. Cadillac is a good example of earth controlling excess water. This is a Moroccan plaster technique and can be used to finish sinks and showers, places that need to be completely waterproof. Although this is the most effective plaster technique for water control, it also requires a lot of labor. I've witnessed natural buildings completely erode away after the lime plasters had failed. And it's always a harsh reminder of how critical waterproofing is, especially in a natural wall system. Cementitious plasters may seem more durable, but they're incompatible with natural building systems because of their low permeability rating. It's also critical to understand the difference between hydrated and hydraulic lime plasters. Hydrated lime requires more technical understanding, but it's the most durable solution. Hydraulic lime or quicklime is less durable but easier to use. Having a skilled plaster is fundamental to Earth's success in mitigating this excess water. In Wu Xing, there's a cycle I haven't touched on yet. It's the inner cycle. So in this case, it's a combination of the destructive cycle and the controlling cycle, acting simultaneously. So one unique climate we can look at for mitigating water is hot and humid climates. Absorbing humidity through clay, silica, cork, or other means is not enough because these materials can only absorb so much water. It's difficult to use fire, like solar or a wood stove, to dehumidify if the climate is already inherently hot, right? So even cooling tubes, which can cool the space, will not always dehumidify the air enough. So we need to look to mechanical means in this scenario. Elemental design in the inner cycle backs this up. We see three relationships in action here: fire reducing humidity, heat powering the mechanical system, and the mechanical system absorbing the humidity. We've discussed how to balance an excess of water, but what about a scarcity of water? We do this by harnessing the power of metal, also known as ether or innovation. Metal elements can help to channel or contain the flow of water. We see this in pipe systems and in rainwater catchment, flashing, and metal roofs. This is essential in dry climates where they don't want the water to evaporate, and so they pipe it to keep it running and abundant. I'm not sure if this is a good solution across the board, but it's a good example to show how metal can protect the scarcity of water as a means of containing it. So let's move on to the next element, wood. Wood refers to any plant based or biogenic material. The porous nature of wood gives it insulating properties, which is often why it's sometimes considered air. It also has a unique ability to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So here are some examples of the use of wood in our homes. We see straw bale, mass timber, cross laminated timber, and hempcrete. One reason they're so popular is due to their insulating properties, carbon sequestration, and in some cases, the use of agricultural byproducts which also contribute to a circular economy. Another way to look at wood as air is through the carbon cycle. Wood has an incredible capacity for sequestering carbon. As a tree grows, they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, storing it within their stalks, roots, and leaves. As wood grows, it goes from being mostly water to solid wood to mostly air. And then when it's ready to go back to the earth, it releases its carbon. So that's why harnessing it at its lightest stage, right before it shifts to releasing carbon, is how storing the wood element in our buildings not only insulates, but keeps the carbon from being released back into the atmosphere. When there's too much wood, we look to metal. Proper forest management not only improves the health of the forest, but it helps us shape our homes. By cutting back and thinning the forest with the metal element, we actually create space for more life to grow. We see this with coppicing. Many trees thrive on being cut back, sometimes all the way back to the stump. This becomes a vital resource of biomass to improve soil health. It also helps mitigate wildfires and becomes an abundant source of building material. When we build with wood, we often need screws, fasteners, and brackets to assemble them efficiently. These not only provide extra reinforcement, but can be useful for seismic and structural considerations. Having too much wood in our homes, while beautiful, is not necessarily practical in the eyes of elemental design. During my time living in the tropics, I became savvy in building with bamboo, a wood element. I was captivated by its rapid growth, its abundance, and its remarkable strength. After visiting Bali and learning the joinery techniques, I realized two things. First, this was a highly skilled job, and second, it was a dying art among the coming generations in Bali. And as much as this saddened me, I was also impressed by newer technologies that make building with bamboo simpler and more cost effective. Back in Maui, the bamboo construction consisted of tying bamboo poles together with metal strapping. So, this is an example of how wood can be balanced with metal. When there's a scarcity of wood, we can look to water. This one's pretty obvious, but in many dry desert climates, buildings are built with earth because the region does not have an adequate supply of wood. But we still need wood, not only structurally, but in the landscapes around us to reduce that harsh aridity. So while it's important to keep moisture out of our buildings, it's also important to conserve water for the use of growing plants for both structural and temperature control. Land management comes first, with our buildings being secondary. So here are some examples of water supporting wood. We can capture water on site by using the natural flow of water over the slope of the land. This minimizes erosion and topsoil runoff in really wet climates, but even in dry climates, it can help retain the water on site. So, with this form of passive irrigation, we can grow healthy trees. This is often the solution for desertification. In Africa, they're revitalizing life in the Sahara by using swales and berms. The use of gray water systems is another important feature in bringing wood back into a building site. Our water is not just clean or dirty, it's not black or white. There's a bit of a gray area. So in nature, nothing is wasted, and in our homes, our gray water can be used as fertilizer to grow plants and even our food. Our next element is fire. Fire represents heat, energy, and light. In the context of building design, fire is both a vital resource and a potential hazard that must be managed carefully. My friend Mel broke my heart when she described watching her beautiful home burn down. She said it lit up like a tissue box. Actually, I knew a few people who lost their homes to a fire that year, and it was a reminder of the extreme flammability of wood framed homes. This experience reinforced my commitment to designing with more climate considerations and using fire resistant materials like earth in these types of climates. So, if there's too much fire, it's controlled with water. So, here we're going to look at evaporative cooling, humidity and pressure, how we can move air, and wildfire resiliency. Do you ever notice on a really hot day that simply being near the water feels refreshing. You don't even have to go swimming or even touch the water, and you still get that sense of relief. That's called evaporative cooling. Evaporative cooling works best in climates with low relative humidity. So you'll see these techniques mostly in hot and dry climates. For example, a pool can simply cool the air around it as the water is evaporated. If a fan or a breeze is directed over the pool, it can pull the cool air into the spaces that need it most. Green roofs not only insulate buildings, they also cool the surrounding air through evapotranspiration. Plants release moisture, which absorbs heat as it evaporates, thereby cooling the area. A metal roof, on the other hand, will heat up really fast. In fact, any type of vegetation strategically placed can cool the air and reduce the wind flow. And when we reduce that wind flow, in turn, reduce wildfire spread. And cooling towers can be designed in really hot and dry areas. These towers and tunnels capture the prevailing winds and basically replace the hot air below. And then at the same time, they have these channels of water running below the ground. And so it sucks up the air from below and has this passive evaporative cooling effect. So water actually moves air. Humidity changes the density of air. So this creates movement through the high and low pressure zones that are ultimately seen in the shifting of weather patterns. So when we're designing for passive ventilation, we're looking for those high and low pressure zones. In this case, water is acting a little bit like air. You'll hear in the passive house community that air is considered lazy. And while this is true, there are still passive design systems we can implement to create high and low pressure zones, which convince that lazy air to move. Breezeways are a great example. They create high and low pressure zones. So if you have a prevailing wind coming through a breezeway, that creates a high pressure zone. And then if you have those windows and doors open on either side in a low pressure zone, the air will be moved through passively because of that pressure differential created. Another example is the stack effect, which is also called the chimney effect. So warm air in a building rises, creating a low pressure area below. As the warm air exits through the openings in the building's upper level, cooler air is pulled in through the openings in the lower level. This creates cross ventilation of cool air through the space. You can also vary the location and size of the openings, forcing the air to take a less direct path. Air movement will increase inside the space when there's more twists and turns. Changing the path of prevailing winds can also be achieved by using vegetation or other man made objects. The Venturi effect is when the speed of air increases as it's funneled through a smaller space. So, this can also increase the passive cooling effect. It's good to remember that these types of systems require occupancy involvement, like adjusting the sails of a ship. We have to open and close windows depending on the external circumstances. Hopefully, in the future, with human innovations, these systems can be automated with the option for manual use as well. I want to sidestep over to fire resilient design while we're on this topic of controlling fire. So, here we see the destructive cycle at work to mitigate wildfires. In this case, earth smothers fire. So, we can use earthen materials such as lime plasters, cementitious boards, etc., surrounding all areas of the soffits, walls, and roofs. If fire feeds on wood, we can look to the reverse by minimizing its use. We can trim woody overgrowth in surrounding landscaping and minimize the use of wood overall on the exterior of the building. If we don't have enough fire element or heat, we're going to address this with wood. Wood stoves are a great example. Even though I know they're catching some flack, especially in cities where people worry about carbon emissions. I get that. But out in the country, if you're surrounded by trees, it seems a bit unfair. While burning wood does release some CO2, it can be sustainable if we're smart about how we harvest it. Also, modern wood stoves are super efficient. There's safety concerns, but as long as you follow the rules of proper ventilation, dry wood, and a good stove, you're good to go. Wood can also help store heat when the wood element is used as insulation, like we discussed before. When there's a scarcity of fire, we can also look to the regenerative and controlling inner cycle of wood, fire, and metal. For example, when we fan the flames, we can move air via a fan to ignite the wood and create warmth. Circulating air here is critical to distributing heat throughout the home. Passive solar is another good example of this in cold climates. So, by using our own ingenuity, technology, which represents the metal element, and the shaping of structures with wood, we can increase the solar heat or fire element within our homes. So, here's how we can achieve passive solar design. First, let's align our buildings 10 degrees to the southeast or northeast if you're in the southern hemisphere to maximize the morning solar gain, warming the building when it needs it the most. If we want more active support from the sun, we can install a PV system, making sure our roof pitches align with the angle optimized for that latitude. Designing overhangs is often overlooked. Overhangs can block the summer sun while allowing winter sun to penetrate the building. The calculations are actually quite simple to account for the winter and summer solstice. All we need to know is the latitude your building site will be on. Overhangs not only help with passive cooling, but they can also act as additional protection for the exterior plaster or cladding of the walls, and even help mitigate water damage at the headers of our windows, a place that is highly vulnerable to leaking. Optimize window placement, size, and glazing to maximize that natural light and heat while minimizing heat loss. So the rule of thumb is 7% of your window size to the floor area, and then up to 11% with plenty of thermal mass. Storing heat with thermal mass is like nature's battery. With thermal mass, we can store fire in the walls or the floors of our buildings. So, earthen materials such as stone, concrete, and brick can also absorb heat during the day and slowly release it at night. And don't forget, in cold climates, insulating thermal mass from the exterior is essential. Moving on to Earth. So, as I mentioned earlier, Earth is anything inert that doesn't contain biodegradable material. Earth and building materials are stable, solid, and durable. So, examples of strictly earthen wall systems include rammed earth, earth bag, compressed earth blocks, and aircrete. Many of these balance the correct ratio of clay, sand, and aggregate and are often tamped into compression. So, these systems work well in hot and dry climates. So, here are a couple examples. Several years ago, I helped build a 3-story casita into the bedrock of a cliffside. And we merged the foundation with the bedrock, and it felt very secure for being on a literal cliff. Later, when I moved to Colorado, I started working with compressed earth blocks, like I mentioned before. These blocks are made from local earth and compressed into durable bricks and are a resilient building material in that climate. To balance excess earth, we control it with wood. Because earth is so durable and solid, it often lacks that flexibility that wood provides. In my personal experience working with earthen wall systems, we often still need framing members around windows and doors, blocking to mount cabinets on, etc. So, drilling into earth can also pose problems and require special tools. And it's also a challenge to install and maintain plumbing and electrical without framing out chase walls. So, wood provides the necessary structural support for mounting and framing. Although Earth can hold up to a variety of scenarios, including temperature and moisture, it often falls short with seismic pressure. We often see reinforcement with rebar, but the more sustainable choice would be to reinforce with wood. Actually, many countries lean on simple and primitive systems like using bamboo as reinforcement in earthen structures instead of rebar. Some natural wall systems use both earth and wood, like light straw clay, hempcrete, light adobe, and cob. The natural fibers act as a binder for tensile strength while also offering some insulative properties, depending on the amount used. Hempcrete is a great example of earth balanced with wood. Biogenic Base materials like hempcrete and light straw clay are a good example of this natural inner cycle. So you'll see here the wood element is the hemp or straw fiber, the lime is our earth, and the water is, well, water. The wood absorbs the water, which holds the diluted lime or clay that ultimately petrifies the wood fibers. The insulating sequence or the counteracting sequence is essentially the opposite of the controlling sequence. It's when an element that typically controls another is instead weakened. For instance, excessive volumes of wood may defeat small volumes of metal. An axe can be broken or dulled after chopping down multiple trees. This is why it's also considered the insulting sequence. Just remember that these types of systems use a lot of water and need time to cure. And that can take months depending on the weather conditions. So just know your climate before including any kind of water in your wall system. We balance a scarcity of earth by looking to fire. Earth and materials become stronger when they're fired. Just like a clay pot has to go into a kiln to be strengthened, materials like bricks and terracotta are fired. Other earthen materials are dried or cured in the sun. We see this with adobe, compressed earth blocks, and even cob. Earthen bricks are an example of bricks fired with both wood fiber and clay at low temperatures. Although they cannot be exposed to the exterior elements like a regular brick, they are still much stronger than an adobe brick, which is simply cured in the sun. We see this also with the lime cycle used for plastering. So the limestone must be heated to turn into quicklime to be utilized in our buildings. And last but not least, we have metal. Quite honestly, metal is very difficult to describe. In essence, it's the unseen. It encompasses more than just physical metals. In the context of elemental design, metal includes technology and even has somewhat of an energetic connotation. As technology and innovation, metal involves the integration of modern technology into our living spaces. So, smart home systems and energy efficient appliances go a long way to enhance our comfort, efficiency, and sustainability. But relying too much on technology can lead to this imbalance. So, we have to use technology mindfully, ensuring it improves our quality of life without overwhelming our natural surroundings. When we want to balance excess metal, we turn to fire. So, do you know that dreaded feeling when your modern marvel is on its way out? That precious computer, appliance, or even your car starts to overheat. That's fire keeping metal in check. We all know that our mechanical and electronics have a lifespan. When we hopefully recycle them, they're melted down to transform into the new technology of the day. So that brings us to the ability of fire to shape and bend metal, helping us build our homes and develop technologies. Fire also plays a role in generating the energy that powers our modern world. And energy here is the element of metal. We know that energy is abundant in our world, but it has to be harnessed and controlled for us to use it. Burning fossil fuels to run our machines involves combustion. Solar panels convert sunlight into electricity. Fusion power harnesses the same reactions that fuel the sun, and it represents a future potential for clean energy. In today's world, our energy is dependent on these fiery sources. Having a scarcity of metal isn't always a bad thing, since metal is so carbon intensive. However, if we need more structural support and we don't have access to metal elements, we can look to earth, like using earth based building materials to reinforce a metal frame. And I'm going to mention fossil fuels here. Although we know how unsustainable they do still come from the earth and are our primary source of generating energy. So it's a perfect example of earth generating metal. Geothermal systems are perhaps more sustainable and allow us to tap directly into that regulating energy held in the earth. We can also lean on Earth's thermal mass for storing and slowly releasing energy over time. If we have a scarcity of mechanical systems for heat, Earth and thermal mass can help make up for that lack. I have noticed in the natural building community that there's a general aversion to mechanical systems. And this is just a generalization, but it goes against the balancing principle of metal controlling wood. So, bringing fresh air into our buildings is very important. For example, if on a cold day we want to keep the heat in and not have to open a window, we have to have a means of bringing fresh air into the house. So not only does this minimize the natural buildup of CO2 from the air we exhale, but it can also help manage humidity within our homes. To close out this section on metal, I want to remind us that metal is also considered ether and has somewhat of a spiritual connotation. So many sacred buildings throughout history were built with deeper intentions of inspiration. From the intricate details of a stained glass window to an inlaid floor, these buildings were vessels of spirit. Their creators were serving a higher purpose or working for the simple act of creation itself. And while we don't see these intentions, they're infused into the building. So next time you visit a famous building, along with observing its architectural features, see if you can envision some of these unseen factors. What intentions might the builders and designers have had? What effect does this have on the overall feeling of the space? Many of these unseen elements really do create a sense of balance in our environments, and perhaps without our knowing, increase our quality of life both physically and energetically. Elemental design is about creating spaces that are in harmony with nature, resilient to climate challenges, and considerate of our overall well being. It's a practice that brings together ancient wisdom and modern technology to ensure that our buildings are not just structures, but sanctuaries. For those of you looking to get hands on, you can visit my website for a wealth of DIY sustainable design resources I have. You'll find Nature Ally, which is a sustainable business directory. You'll also find a passive heating and cooling checklist and an up to date materials price list and a lot of other good resources too. So head over there and check that out. And if you like this video, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. It keeps me motivated to create free content like this for everybody out there. So please, please, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for joining me in exploring how we can harness the power of nature to create buildings that enhance our well being. So if you have any questions, you can reach me through my website in the link below. And of course, you can find me on all the usual social platforms, which I will also link below as well. Thank you so much for joining me and learning about elemental design.